Coming up next. Stay tuned to learn more about the state of blockchain education at major universities all around the world. Reimagine 2020.
Hey, my name is Erick Pinos, and I run the Blockchain Education Network, and I am the America's Ecosystem Lead at Ontology Network. I'm excited to be here and to help reimagine 2020.
Hey everyone watching, it's Patrick McLain, one of your hosts here for Reimagine 2020. We have a very special guest, I would say, because we were just chatting earlier, and I've been able to read a little bit about Erick the last week. And not only is he really in touch with the developer community through what he does at Ontology, and I'll let him explain that, but he's also the president of BEN, the Blockchain Education Network, right, Erick?
Yep.
So as everybody knows, and for the thousands of students watching this right now, BEN does a lot of the same things kind of MouseBelt does to support the community. So excited to get his perspective. And I will stop talking, Erick, and let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. Really appreciate having me on. So my name is Erick Pinos, and I am the America's Ecosystem Lead at Ontology Network. I also run the Blockchain Education Network. So with Ontology, I focus a lot on making partnerships with enterprises for our blockchain. So we're a public chain, but we're also a distributed trust platform. We have a decentralized identity solution that we help enterprises implement. So blockchain and identity use cases like certifications, medical records, supply chain, IoT devices, anything that would require an exchange of identity or exchange of data based off of your identity to a person or to an object. And then I also spend a lot of time with Blockchain Education Network educating students about blockchain and educating them about these blockchain use cases so that we can help bring more developers and more adoption to the space.
Awesome. So let's touch base on the Blockchain Education Network for a second, because again, I think it's very relevant to what we're talking about. But how did you kind of come to that point? Like, what was your path? What was your path to get there?
Yeah, so I really started my blockchain journey in 2014 when the MIT Bitcoin Club had just started, and to kick off the club, they did the MIT Bitcoin airdrop. So they raised money from some alumni, or multiple alumni, to give every MIT student $100 worth of Bitcoin, which at the time Bitcoin was only $200. So every MIT student got half a Bitcoin to airdrop to them. Most people sold. Most people were like, oh, free $100, let me cash out. But some students were interested in figuring out more about what happened. So they all came together and joined the club and learned about Bitcoin, learned how to get started in Bitcoin, learned what to do, became developers, became traders, whatever the case, started companies. From there, the MIT Bitcoin Club was one of the founding clubs of the Blockchain Education Network in 2014. So they, alongside a couple of other universities, Stanford, and University of Michigan, University of Delaware, and Penn State, they all kind of came together. They said, let's start this network, Blockchain Education Network, share resources. Because at that time, if you were interested in blockchain, it was very likely that you were probably only a couple of you on your campus, maybe even in your city, that were interested. So it was definitely very helpful. There wasn't a lot of stuff online. There wasn't these classes. There weren't all these resources. And anytime someone tried to get a blockchain class implemented, the university always shut it down, because to them, Bitcoin was scams, Bitcoin was drugs, so didn't want any of that. So it had to be a lot. It was very underground, and it was very much students teaching other students. That network grew exponentially. There were blockchain clubs all over the world that joined, universities that joined, and fast forward to today, the Blockchain Education Network is present in over 96 different countries. We have students from 96 different countries. We have professors, teachers, alumni. Now teachers are on board. Now professors are on board. Now faculty's on board. They're starting to get the classes. They're starting to get the accredited courses. So it very much represents like a shift in the network and the focus of the network from students teaching students to now we have like institutional support and institutional partnerships. But I think at its heart, it's always about like providing resources for these students and being able to, help them grow and help them implement these use cases, and helping them get jobs or helping them start companies, helping them fly to conferences, giving them free financial aid, like free conference tickets, free flights, and delivering all this online education to them so they can learn, and they get to learn for free.
For all the students listening, you see Eric was around in the very beginning. He's saying there were no resources, so you guys all have it easy now.
Yeah,
But
you guys really do, because I think most people, like, we had such an uphill battle of people thinking we were scammers and people thinking like we were like the drug club. And it just surprised me. Like anytime you tell anyone about Bitcoin, it's like, oh, that's scam. Like Bitcoin's dead. Bitcoin's dead. And now, I mean, now you have blockchain, right? So you don't even necessarily have to talk about Bitcoin because there's a lot of different areas you can approach blockchain. So even if you don't like crypto, because I think people have reasons not to like crypto, blockchain itself is its own innovation that has wild implications outside of the cryptocurrency space.
and I agree with like a lot of what you said, and I'm curious your thoughts. Like, so you were involved in 2014. Obviously, that was really early. I think even when MouseBelt started to kind of apply resources and help for universities early 2018, we still kind of saw an uphill battle. We still felt like there was hardly any accredited courses. A lot of the organizations were still, on campus organizations, not necessarily affiliated with the school, student ran organizations. I do think a lot has changed, I guess, since 2018. I would say the state of it today seems like maybe we're 25-30% there. But just curious your perspective, like, what's changed over the last 5-6 years, and what do you think the state of it is in acceptance and education now?
Yeah, well, like mentioned, I think now universities are warming up to the idea of having these courses, and they're just warming up to it, right? It's not like they'll hop on it. Like even if they say they'll hop on it through like surveys or whatever, actually going and starting to do it is like, hey, well, you guys wanted to do a course, here's a course. It's still very much an uphill battle, as you guys have experienced. A lot of our clubs that started in 2014 have been shut down, and we had clubs that we'd helped start, like for example the Wellesley Bitcoin Club, which back then they were all Bitcoin clubs. It wasn't even like blockchain. It was like pretty much you're talking about Bitcoin. Wellesley Bitcoin Club had started, and they got a letter from the school shutting them down. And so that was entirely extracurricular. It wasn't like affiliated. It was affiliated with the school. It was registered as a club, but it wasn't a course. It was just a group. It was like a passion group, like an activity group, right? Like a hobby group. And the school still felt it necessary to go and shut them down. And in the letter, it detailed out like Bitcoin is a known scam. Bitcoin is for drugs. Like Bitcoin is for criminals and illegal. So shut down this club. It's an illegally, like you're doing a club, like it's harmful to the community. So those are the kinds of letters that we got. And we got those letters consistently, and like all of our clubs were dropping like flies like all over, because the schools were just so hostile against the idea of like Bitcoin being taught on campus. It's like the dark web being taught on campus. So I think like just from that to the point, just that from there to now, and now it's like, okay, yeah, we're maybe interested in blockchain. Maybe there's a professor that's interested in blockchain, and sure, it's still very much an uphill battle to try to get that accredited course installed on campus. But at the very least, they're not like hostile and like shutting clubs down anymore. So at least we can focus on building up these relationships and building up the presence. And yeah, I think it definitely helps. It definitely helps the growth, and it's very much represents a change that just moving beyond like getting the ban hammer and like getting our clubs shut down. As long as that's not happening, then it's okay, because honestly our goal is not necessarily to be institutionally, like have institutional blockchain courses. It's more so to be able to deliver blockchain education to as many students as possible. And also once you go outside of the US, it gets a lot easier, because outside of the US there's no common core. I mean, in most places, right? There's no common core. There's not like these big requirements. Like we talked to a couple of schools in Latin America, and they're like almost immediately on board. Like they get it, and they're like, okay, yeah, we get it. We want it. We want it in. So we've definitely had, and I think overall the space has seen a lot more adoption in other countries, because they don't have these rigid requirements over like, oh, we need an approval process of at least like one calendar year or one school year before we can like consider changing the curriculum or updating the curriculum to new standards.
Well, and I think that was one of the interesting parts is this technology is moving so quickly, right? It's like, what like, you know, at least if you go back to 2018, 2017, it's like, what were you even going to teach, right? Like maybe you do a course on Solidity, right? Smart contracts, I mean, that would be the default. But I think it's been moving so fast that it's a really good example of, you know, academia in its current state, maybe not being the most efficient, right? Because it's counterintuitive to a fast changing technology to teach that, right? Where what you learn today might not be as relevant in 18 months or 24 months. So if you need a year lead time to approve something, you're kind of always going to be leading from behind. One more thing, kind of on the education side before, you know, I want to pivot a bit into, you know, the work you're doing with Ontology and get more of your perspective there. But kind of talking about regulatory requirements or specific hurdles, maybe geographic hurdles. Do you, a lot of the hurdles you're saying, maybe I'm hearing it right or not, but you're saying you see those more like in the US or Western countries and less so in developing countries?
Yeah, in the US, there's a lot of, I would say, regulatory hurdles. I feel like, I mean, the US is still active and it's still very good because there's just like such a sheer number of people that are interested that we can make it work, right? It's like, all right, we'll just make it work with clubs, or, you know, if a university doesn't want to work with us at a university level, we can always find a group of students there. And so there's still reach at that university, right? And they can go and they can tell their friends. So there's still reach. The important thing is having reach to as many different geographic areas and as students from as many different backgrounds, from as many different like pedigrees and like places of economic disparity as possible, right? If we were just like in one region, then it wouldn't really make much sense. Or if we were like, say, only the Ivy League schools, it wouldn't really make much sense. It's not a coalition of Ivy League blockchain clubs. It's, you know, every blockchain, any student, it's not even just blockchain clubs, it's any students, because we have pockets of students at universities that don't have blockchain clubs. And so I think that becomes very relevant outside of the US, especially as you go to countries that have very different kinds of cultures and don't do extracurriculars. Right? They don't have clubs as an offering at their universities. Clubs aren't a thing in some countries, and so instead of clubs there, right, the strategy is different. It's like, how do you work with teachers, you work with professors, or you coordinate an after school program, or you work with a community center, or you work with libraries, or you partner with a library and then you do the workshops at the library, and that's where students congregate. So it's definitely a lot of like you need a lot of cultural understanding. And definitely, you know, for us, it's not like, oh, well, let's just figure it out. We bring on we have a very decentralized team, right? And like anyone, we have a lot of volunteers, a lot of leaders, a lot of region heads, and they all come, usually they're from a country or they're from a culture, and oftentimes they don't speak very good English, but they understand blockchain. And so we work with them and we bring them on board, and then they're able to really take blockchain education across these cultural barriers and across these language barriers in ways that, you know, we never could. Like me, I'm Latin American, so I can do that for Latin America and what we need to do there. But when we go to places like Vietnam or Turkey, or, you know, anywhere in Asia, Europe, Africa, like we're not going to pretend that like we're not going to pretend that what we're doing in the US would work over there. Is like, you have to understand it's like very different, and you have to like be willing to be flexible on it and to be able to budge and say like, well, okay, you know, it's not, the vision isn't a blockchain course at every school. Like their schools aren't even going to work, right? So, or for some of these countries, like the school system is just in such a failing state that it's much more effective to just work with, say, like libraries, for example, or with, you know, with people directly online. So it varies from place to place. So it definitely much is a very geographically based solution. Like there's no one size fits all.
Got it. Yeah, and I was just having a conversation with Alex Kahana from Consensus Health, and we were kind of talking about, you know, people's responsibility in blockchain, and I was laughing when I look at the colleges, you know, how I see them. It is very decentralized, right? It kind of fits the community where, you know, people are, you know, we don't need the school because we can have a club, right? So as long as you're not trying to shut down the club because you're calling people drug dealers, then like as long as you get past that barrier, you're doing all right. But let's pivot here, and again, it was very nice to get your input on the university side, and I'd like to talk about it more. But I want to hear a bit about you know, Ontology, kind of how you see that platform for anyone that's not familiar, or maybe wants to hear an additional perspective, and you know, kind of what your day-to-day job there is.
Yeah, so Ontology is a public blockchain, smart contract platform. And what really draws me to Ontology as opposed to like say other public blockchain platforms is it has a lot of identity tools. And so it's all very much also a decentralized identity platform. And that enables a whole slew of blockchain identity applications a whole slew of blockchain applications that involve identity that people have always talked about, but have always been very difficult to implement. So as soon as you think of blockchain for things like certifications, credentials, IoT, supply chain, medical records, energy, all of these things need identity. You need to be able to peg an identity to a person or to an object or to a company, right? If you look at DAOs or if you look at like all of these things, you need to be able to peg these identities to, or the identities of who these wallet addresses belong to, or what are these data points to real world items. And that's something I always saw like very much lacking. Like I feel like that never was these identity services like decentralized claim issuance, decentralized verification, like that wasn't never really a core offering of blockchain. It was more so like, oh, it'd be a nice to have, but if we want blockchain to be able to expand into protecting people's data privacy, or if we wanted to expand into medical record, into the medical field, we wanted to expand into real estate, we wanted to expand into credentials and in patents and copyright, like you need to have a very robust identity solution. And so like, we provide that. And that's kind of my main interest in helping Ontology grow, is in helping realize some of these more complicated blockchain use cases, like mentioned, like blockchain for medical records, blockchain for academic certifications, blockchain for data privacy, blockchain for copyrights and patent law. Right? Like I think those are all really interesting use cases that we've been pushing for, and I think that the world could really benefit from.
Got it. And I tend to agree with you. We do some work with like kind of general corporate innovation, and I think we've even just take the use case of supply chain. I see a lot of enterprise companies. I think what's interesting to me is you go back to 2018, maybe through mid 2019, they were deploying a lot of pilots with, a variety of blockchain companies. I think the blockchain protocols or platforms kind of, as they, had just raised money and were kind of looking to prove themselves, really wanted these real world pilots at scale to say, look, my platform works, right? So they were kind of chasing these enterprise companies that had the ability to highlight their technology at scale. And then I think, or at least my perspective, is over that last year and a half, there was a lot of fragility to it in regards to, the enterprises. Maybe there was one internal evangelist that was really pushing for the project. So maybe they left and the interest in blockchain on that project kind of dropped, right? Or maybe there was some consortium that was joined and maybe one company came late and like their interests weren't favored as the rest of their competitors or peers. So you kind of had this like myriad of reasons why maybe pilots weren't happening, or there was a lot of roadblocks to them. And obviously enterprise companies, larger organizations, they have, their systems are complex, their chains of commands are complex. So I think a lot of companies end up kind of hitting the same barriers each time. And there tends to be a decent amount of redundant work, whether that's in phone calls or meetings or approvals or planning stages. And I really started to look at identity as just one thing that they stripped it out and just said, if I'm going to approach blockchain at all, right? So maybe my company might touch supply chain or might touch whatever, or there's a consumer application for it. If I get identity or signature done right one time, then I shouldn't need to re-implement it or rethink about it as I approach each new application. So I'm just curious, when you guys are approaching enterprise or large organizations like private chains, how do you guys really work with them from like a very like core like ethos level to like think about identity?
Yeah, from a very core level, like I think a big thing is making a very, very tailored solution or very tailored collaboration agreement between companies. If you look at I think a lot of projects were really drawn to Hyperledger because Hyperledger is very flexible. Sure, it's like it's a permission chain, which is why it's very flexible. Right? You run up your own instance of it, but it needs to be, because enterprises need very, very I feel like a lot of public chains kind of approach companies and say, oh, if you want to play ball with us, you got to play by our blockchain's rules. Like you got to decentralize your entire stack and write it all onto the public chain.
There's very few incentives for like for-profit enterprise companies to do anything on a public chain. I mean,
right. It's like they're already making so much money from like the data fragmentation. Like, why would they give up that business model unless there's a stronger business model, which I think there is. Why would they? And then also, it's like, just to play ball with this relatively minor like blockchain community, like compared to like the global multi-trillion-dollar like supply chain market, right? Like it just doesn't add up. That's why like a lot of blockchain companies are native blockchain companies. They're new, they're startups that start natively in the blockchain space and try to figure it out in blockchain. So I definitely think getting traditional enterprises on board is a much harder challenge. And so I think that part of the solution there is, when you approach them, you have to provide a much more tailored solution as to like how this benefits their needs and what exactly they benefit out of it. And it comes down to, saving costs in the settlement layer, because you don't have to wait for things to settle as long, or you need less people to audit and to oversee the settlement. Right. So I think that, and a lot of it sounds pretty boring, which I think it is. And I think that a lot of it is more like boring innovation rather than the fun and exciting stuff like non-fungible tokens and DAOs and DeFi, which like I love all of these things, but like my work requires me to really like step back and like think like, okay, I like playing with these things online and I like building these things and helping build these things out. But when you go and you pitch to like a Fortune 500 company and you're trying to get them to implement the blockchain so that blockchain instantly hits like millions of people, it's like, if you tell them about a DAO, they're like, well, what is that? Like, what? I don't even know. Can Bitcoin even be trusted? A lot, like you said, I really like the point that you mentioned is like oftentimes when one of these companies decides to go for one of these pilots, it's usually because they have an evangelist that's there at that company that's pushing for it internally. And a lot of companies that I talk to, those evangelists, they're still on the stage where they have to convince their company that Bitcoin isn't just for criminals.
They're like the outcast. Like, it's like, yeah. I've heard it many times. It's like, I'm the guy on the team that's the Bitcoin guy. Like, I'm the one pushing for it the most, but like, they're literally telling me like, yeah, but I'm like having to kind of try to convince everyone that this isn't nuts, and it's like, if they stop doing that, then it's like this huge company that has all this opportunity. If we really believe in blockchain, right? If we think, and a lot of, I think people that are in the space obviously are passionate about it. If we think, okay, this one company could prove that 1 billion records or 1 trillion of their transactions can work, right? We can prove it. We kind of need these guys for validation, not for validation, but for, just proof of concept to a certain extent, right? To even get better, right? So we have to think about it. It's even if we don't like it, even if it doesn't make sense, even if we wish that every company should love blockchain, there's these base realities that I think, I'm starting to see more and more that without solving these, nothing else matters. You could have the best technology ever. You're like, I can, my Bitcoin prints gold in your office and it like pays you to use it. They would still be like a little hesitant, right? And there's these moving parts. So
yeah, like, I think it's reasonable. I don't think it's reasonable to say that, if they won't innovate, they'll die. Like, you're not going to replace the majority of the world's banks and the majority of the world's supply chain companies and the majority of the world's social media networks just because they didn't choose to adopt blockchain. Like, yeah, there's innovation over the incumbents, and there's always new startups that pop up that do things better and they beat out the incumbents. But like, you have to bring the world with, like, people kind of are thinking that blockchain is its own separate world and it's just going to be its own world, and that whoever doesn't choose to join the blockchain world will die out. It's like, no, like, companies are going to adopt blockchain, and it is our responsibility to bridge these new digital assets to the real world assets and old world assets. Like, we can't just imagine that the world is just going to start from scratch with an entirely decentralized framework. Like, there's always compatibility, there's always compromises, there's always like these bridgebacks that we need to do.
Oh, 100%. And as much as I love this community, I would say it's guilty of that at times, right? We're a little siloed. I mean, it's a little bit of an echo chamber, which is, it's always one interesting thing, I think, kind of in the reverse too, I see with students is, um, sometimes, I've been around where, people in this space have gone through the ICO craze or whatever. And, there's some scams, there were scams in this space, right? So I see a little bit of pessimism from some people, right? Like they've been in it for 5-6 years, and oh, this project's not going to launch, or oh, this isn't it. But then you get on a call with 40, 19 to 23-year-old college students, and they didn't go through any of this, right? They're like, yeah, like I'm going to build an application and I want to use blockchain, right? And so it's like very refreshing. Like I don't see any of this. Then I'll go to another meeting with like so-called crypto experts, and it's like, it's totally different, right? So I do think there's even a generational gap that's coming around the corner, which is one of the reasons I think we're excited, and excited for what you guys are doing as well at Ben to kind of inspire that, right? Like it's going to take a lot of good ideas to get there. Hey, so I know we're getting close to running out of time here. I'm sure we can keep this conversation going. Can we dig in a bit more into ontology? Just want to, I guess I want to hear a bit about, what's on ontology's roadmap, kind of in a condensed version. Maybe why you love ontology. There's like 1 or 2 bullet points why people really need to pay attention to it. And then I would also like to hear, I know you're in New Jersey right now, yeah?
Yeah.
But yeah, just your perspective as much as you have of what it's kind of like, because Ontology is a Chinese-based company. What does that market look like, or what are your guys' feelings there? What's the appetite in China for Ontology?
For sure. So in our roadmap is very much focused around data and decentralized data. So not only are we working more on our identity solution and more complicated features rather than just we have the standard claim issuance, claim verification, working more on more trust anchors and more end-to-end encryption for transferring data between people, right? And being able to control multiple, right now you can control multiple identities for different areas of your life. So like, you have like a personal identity, you have like a professional identity, you have like a work identity, you have identity that's attached not only to people, you have identity that's attached to objects, attached to enterprises. So really supporting this complexity and flexibility of identity-based interactions between different groups. And we're working a lot on building out the layer above that, which is like the marketplaces around it. So once you have people that are getting all this data, like, they're getting certifications, they're getting medical records, they're getting copyrights, issuances, they're getting real estate like housing deeds, or they're getting like these identification points that are given to them. How do you enable them to exchange that information with other people? How do you make marketplaces out of that? If someone wants to do a survey and they want to survey everyone who's above the age of 23 and has a degree in petroleum engineering or computer science, you'd be able to conduct a survey, pay a little bit to access like all these people's data, and then be able to access their data, ask their questions, like whatever you need to do, right? So there's a lot of interesting data marketplace things that you can create on top of a network where everyone is a manager of their own data and has all of this like self-sovereign data. So we definitely are pushing for that. Like we have a lot of technical improvements that are coming out and technical innovations that are coming out regarding that data marketplace. We call it the decentralized data exchange framework. We have a lot more coming out with OntID. There's always technical innovations. Like we always push forward on cross-chain solutions to work with other blockchains. We always push forward on scaling and like becoming even faster. But I think like a lot of like what the focus is on now is on working with enterprises and rolling out like these specific blockchain solutions, because the technology is there. I think the technology is already good enough. It's not about just making the technology even better. It's about working with these enterprises and actually rolling out these solutions to these different groups, which to the point that you mentioned about me being in New Jersey, I think a big part of this is focused on economically developing regions. So I focus a lot on Latin America. And, even though I'm here and I talk to the banks in New York and I talk to groups based in San Francisco, groups based in Texas and Chicago, and there's like the partnerships that we're making there. But I think that the biggest partnerships or the most important ones that we're making are the ones in Latin America. And so in Latin America, are the groups and the community groups that we partner with. They're the people that are unbanked and can benefit from being able to, hold crypto, get paid in crypto for services. We do a lot of remote work, so people will hire people from Latin America, use OntoID to verify that they have those degrees. Like if I'm looking for an English tutor or someone to like write English articles, I want to make sure that the person is certified ESL, right? I want to make sure they're certified English as a second language. So that's a very useful case of like having blockchain-based certificates. And then they can get paid out in crypto, right? They don't have bank accounts, so they can't get checks, which is how most online work platforms make these payments. You either send a check or you direct deposit it. So being able to pay in crypto is very much a value add for these people that in Latin America, the majority of people supplement their income with online work. And I think online work is the future, remote work is the future. But we're not really catering to it yet, like, because we're only now seeing it as like a necessity because all of these people are out of work because of all the current like market conditions that exist today. So that's definitely an area that we're focusing on and targeting that in regions like Latin America, like Africa. And, it's very much is not solely focused in Asia or the US, which is where most of the Ontology team is based right now. So we do have a lot of people in a lot of different areas, right? We have people in Europe, we have people here in the US, we have people in Asia, all over Asia, which is kind of like where the genesis of the project started, but very much a global project with these initiatives that are present everywhere. And I think it has to be because that's how blockchain kind of is. It's very much a global, it's very hard to start a blockchain project and kind of just be local. Like if you start a blockchain project, unless it's something to do with cryptocurrencies that you're now stuck in a jurisdiction, most blockchain projects are usually instantly global because people will find you from anywhere in the world. And, if they can access your platform, it's like the internet, right? So definitely, rather than trying to say like, all right, we're focusing on a particular region, we're more so like following where the most interest is. And most of the interest, or a lot of interest, came from Latin America because that's where people are having these issues that can be solved by blockchain the most. And so they're the ones that are they're like the earliest adopters. So we're much more happy to work with Latin Americans than in the US, where people kind of are, oh, I got Venmo. Like, I don't really see the need for crypto. I was like, okay, fine. The infrastructure is built here. But you go somewhere like Latin America, that infrastructure is not present there. So it definitely, like, just how they skipped, or how like Africa and Latin America skipped like the desk phone, or they skipped the desktop and they skipped the laptop. They went right to like mobile first internet, from no internet to mobile first internet, and from like not having landlines to just having cell phones and having like wireless internet. Is very much like that. Like if the infrastructure exists, people won't hop onto the next thing. But if the infrastructure doesn't exist, people will skip that phase and they will go right to the next phase. So there's always like a shift in terms of what's the most innovative things that people or that a country has access to.
No, I agree with you 100%. And we only have about 2 minutes here because I've got to jump on the next interview. But I was going to say, to your point, as I mentioned earlier, like I used to live in East Africa for a bit. I lived in Tanzania, and I would see it. And what dawned on me, like people would call America like the largest copper mine in the world. So it has all this like coaxial cable ran underneath it for cable, television, modems, whatever. It's like a lot of interest to these companies, right? But at some point, like 4G, 5G, now all this copper becomes worthless, right? So Now you look at a developing country and say, okay, what's better or what's worse, right? Like, so maybe it was better the last 50, 60, 70 years. Like maybe that country benefited because they had all this infrastructure under the ground. Well, now it even has potential to have a negative side when you go out the next 20 years, because you know how many lobbyists from Comcast, Xfinity, right, are trying to shut down cell phone towers, or not as much anymore, but if you go back the last 20 years, they were trying to keep their copper wires relevant, right? So it's like, even though you had the best technology, having slightly older technology that's legacy that people don't want to let go of can then come back to bite you even more, right? You can lose you might have won the last 50 years, but you might lose the next 20 years because of bureaucracy, right? And where you're trying to hold on to old systems that aren't necessarily the most efficient. But hey, we have about 90 seconds here. What would you like to let the students know? And a student in a blockchain club or thinking about getting into blockchain or their careers, what would be some words of advice you have for them?
Yeah, I'd really like students to know that blockchain is you can build on it, and there are opportunities in blockchain. So I think a lot of the things that kind of scare students or kind of discourage them is it's very much presented as a hobby, or it's just a thing that, you mess around with, join the blockchain club at your school and you mess around with blockchain, but then after a certain time, you got to go back to class, right? You got to start your job search, you got to do whatever. So you don't have time for the blockchain club anymore. And, I think that there are a lot of jobs in the blockchain space. There's still enough jobs, even though like all this crazy stuff is happening, like, Ontology is hiring, like we have the Ben jobs board has over 120 different jobs on it that are still hiring, right? They're still active and available positions. So that's all still available. And you can build on blockchain now. You don't have to wait. It's not a future innovation. It's not a thing that's going to happen in the future. Like you can go and you can spin up anything. Like all of these blockchains have developer tutorials and they have platforms that are open and hackable right now. So definitely want to consider blockchain as like more of a career. It's possible and it's doable. If you just want to like it as a hobby, then that's fine. But don't be discouraged from pursuing blockchain as a career because you think that it's only a hobby or that it can only be a hobby. That's very much not the case. There are people, I know many people that have made their careers out of blockchain, and it's not a bubble. Like the career part is not a bubble, and the innovation part is not a bubble. Like the price can be a bubble, like whatever, that's fine. But if you learn blockchain, you will be able to find jobs in the space if you look for them and you keep putting yourself out there. And it's only going to grow. Like that innovation is going to become more deep, and it's cutting edge. So you'll very much be at the cutting edge. It's very easy to get to the cutting edge because this is all brand new. We're all trying to figure out what's going on together. So, it's not something you have to study like 20 years for before you're able to like broach it. Like you're able to go into it right away.
Guys, listen to Eric. He's been here. President of Blockchain Education Network, on the ecosystem lead for Ontology, a guy you guys should all check out. I think he's been here since 2014, as a student, as kind of looking for resources, looking for guidance. So I think you guys will, do yourselves justice by taking his advice. And Eric, it's been very nice talking with you. I wish we had more time, but let's continue it again some other time, yeah?
No worries. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, you have a great day, yeah?
All right. Bye.
Stay tuned to learn more about student interest in blockchain technology. Reimagine 2020.